And so we begin our delve into the pit of the Fazbear Frights novels, and as a heads up as we begin, I am not going to be reading the books in order because that doesn't actually assist in any way with gathering the lore that's hidden within them. So instead I'm going to begin with these three stories which can accurately be placed into the existing Freddy's timeline. These three stories being What We Found, Coming Home, and Sergio's Lucky Day. Where better to start than to look at the Fazbear's Frights story that actually holds the location that was used for the name of the book series. What We Found gives us the Fazbear's Frights facility that we all know from fnaf 3. In the story it is revealed we have only been 2 weeks since this facility was built, and it is fast approaching its opening day. During the start of the fall season appears to be when this story takes place, and so this would allow us to date this story to the fall of 2017 given the timeline that we have so far. As we see, the events of this story are the same events that would later be retold in the fnaf 3 game and universe by Animded. So Hudson is a 23-year-old night guard who oversees the site and is joined by his childhood friends Barry and Dwayne, who do most of the heavy lifting for the site and are helping to bring in new acquisitions that have been made. Hudson notably has had a more traumatic life than his friends, and as we will see in the Frights novels, this is a common occurrence among our protagonists, and we do come to learn that this is due to Remnant being connected in some way to lingering emotions, particularly agony, which is seen as the strongest one. Hudson therefore has a lot of agony after being abused in his youth by his stepdad Lewis when his dad died 10 years prior before the story and his mother remarried. This would lead to him killing both his mother and Lewis when he started a fire 5 years ago. During a shift, the Springtrap suit is recovered and is brought to the facility and fixed to a wall. Hudson would begin to have hallucinations of the suits attacking him, as well as flashbacks of his past traumas that are so real that they actually inflict physical injury upon him. This does appear to be a trait associated with the energies of Remnant, as they appear to have some kind of a weird magnetic lure towards people with trauma, and those that have trauma when around it seem to cause it to amplify, and it then is able to create memory in real time. This does appear to work on the long-standing paranormal theory of stone tape theory, wherein ghosts are believed to actually be basically recordings where events that have had such strong mental anguish essentially imprint themselves on the environment around them and under the right circumstances become played back, enabling us to basically have ghost encounters. Now, as we come to see, the Springtrap suit in fact does not actually escape from the wall it is chained to during the events of the story, and what we can only assume the Springtrap hunting Hudson is in fact just a Remnant construct based upon what Springtrap was back in the day. And as we continue the tale in the books, we will see that the true culprit behind most of this Remnant energy appears to be Circus Baby, and this would retroactively help to explain her location at this point in the timeline after having been ejected from the Ennard composition. The story would end in a tragic event where Hudson, however, becomes trapped in a large oven and proceeds to burn the site down from the inside with him trapped inside it. Now, going forward, in order to determine where on the timeline certain Frights stories land, we need to analyse two major factors. The characters that we meet in stories may in times overlap, and also certain locations, as they will clue us in to the location and time period of where the stories occur. Now, we don't know for 100% that the Fazbear's Frights facility is in fact located in Hurricane, Utah, but it does seem likely. The site is 10 blocks from Hudson's Grand's apartment, and we also know that a convenience store exists somewhere local which Hudson worked at for 6 months before working for Frights. There is an old-fashioned Sunday place called Charlie's that is on the other side of town from the Frights building. When Hudson was in school, he had a teacher called Mr. Atkin. As schools feature prominently in the series and many stories, any overlap seen between teachers may help determine connections between the stories. We meet an art student designing the site for fazbear's frights named Faith, who Hudson likes. Virgil is an elderly man who alternates shifts with Hudson at the site. Hudson's grandmother is the first of what we will see as the in-tune character in the stories, a sort of mystic of sorts that can sense the energies of Remnant and appears almost magical in nature. She is a short, 5'1", skinny, 82-year-old woman with log white hair and blue eyes. She can sense the remnant around Hudson and fazbear's, it appears, and even warns him to get away from it, knowing that it is instinctually that there is something bad about it. She also seems to know someone called Mr. Pikestaff and creates voodoo dolls of him. Our second story, Coming Home, tells the story of Susie and her family in the wake of the 1985 incident where Susie was murdered. Based on details we get in the story, we know that it occurs in the fall, and this may indicate that it either occurs in 1985 or 1986. Following Susie's death, we know that her dad Hayden left the family. Her mum Patricia and her sister Samantha are still dealing with the agony of the event, which appears to be acting like some kind of a lure, keeping the spirit of Susie around. Samantha is holding on to the agony of her last fight with Susie over a doll they owned named Gretchen, and is trying to ignore the Susie apparitions that she sees. Susie communicates with her through drawings, just like we saw when Jason got messages in the Silver Eyes novels. These drawings reveal that Chica is slowly drawing away Susie each night, and soon the remnant's magnetic pull will take her away completely from the home. By holding on to her agony, Samantha essentially amplifies the remnant surrounding her, which manifests Chica, who attacks until she recovers the doll hidden in a secret room in her home and gives herself and Susie peace, releasing the remnant spirit. Now, the house that Susie's family lives in is an old farmhouse with 3 stories and a wraparound porch and a green roof. It has been built around by newer houses over time, and in the house, Susie and Samantha's rooms appear to be connected to each other. An old oak tree with a tire swing is also noted to sit outside. This house quite possibly makes appearances again in at least 2 other stories in the future. Susie appears to be an in-tune figure, as we noted to be able to see voices as colours, with the mood shown through how vivid they are. Whether this is because she is a spirit or whether she was always meant to be like this is not clear, although it is implied by her godmother that she may have always been sort of aloof in this way. Also of note is her connection to the tree, which she named Oliver, which also shows a strange connection that appears to exist between remnant and plants and their vitality, which appears to somehow connect remnant and again with the whole stone ghost theory. This in some way may link back to the fact of old earth magic in historical religions, whereby ancient religions did seem to think that the earth and nature in some way were connected to life and death when it came to the changing of seasons, as we do notice that quite a lot of these stories take place in the fall. Now, we also learn that Susie apparently has brown hair, which is quite interesting because so far in the franchise it appears that she has always been depicted as blonde, yet we have a workaround in place for this, as we see that the Gretchen doll in fact fits the original Susie description perfectly, and as we see from the girl in the fruity maze, this is exactly what the Gretchen doll is meant to look like. And we do learn in this story that it is strongly believed that Susie was taken while trying to find a place to hide the doll. So this may be in somewhat a way to retcon this fact. Another interesting detail in the story is the happy ghost story that Samantha reads. And as we see in this story, it does seem to imply that the family chooses to move away from the house to distance themselves from the events that occurred. And we do learn in the Silver Eyes novels that occur in the future from this point that by 1995 the families of all the missing kids have appeared to have left town, with the exception of Michael Brooks's family. We have a few other side characters that we see within the story. Susie apparently had a friend called Chloe. Samantha has a therapist slash counsellor named Rhonda. A group of kids pass by the house at one point. One of them is a red-haired girl. Two dark-haired girls are seen. A small blonde boy named Drew, and another boy also are seen. Susie's mum, Patricia, is a textile artist and is a tall, skinny woman with long, dark brown hair. Her friend, who is the godmother of the children, is Jeannie, who is noted to be short, plump and blonde. And our third story. Sergio is a 27-year-old who works at an architecture firm. During the story, we find he attends his 10-year graduation anniversary, which is for the class of 1985, which would imply that this story takes place in 1995. Sergio is a character full of regret and hate for his job, relationship, and expectations of his parents. At some point during the story, he is at a gas station where he finds a doll in the dumpster that appears to resemble Balloon Boy, but is marketed as Lucky Boy. He begins to have good luck and attributes it to the doll. It begins to speak to him and encourages his intrusive and reckless thoughts, and begins to lead him down a dangerously reckless path. He quits his job, ends his relationship, and eventually ends up horrifically mutilating himself. So upon analysing this story, there are two potential ways that I could theorise on this. The first one is that Lucky Boy is not possessed and Sergio is going crazy. The man is already hating his life, he receives good luck and clings to the doll until he breaks mentally, essentially becoming a source of agony remnant because he's basically already in torment over his life to begin with. We know this is too early in the timeline for it to be connected to the main Stitchwave plot, as it would be over 20 years before Afton and the Vengeful Spirit are even trapped together in FNAF 6, and so the only possibility of Lucky Boy actually being possessed does seem to be the spirit of the vengeful ghost, aka Andrew, is in Lucky Boy at this time, as we do learn in stories that he has been in multiple objects before he was in Fetch, but it is never really specified when this is, and seeing as he is clearly a murder victim and this story takes place in 1995, it would make sense that since we don't actually know the exact time that the Vengeful Spirit was killed, he probably died before 1995, so this is just like the beginnings of his story essentially. This is before he even catches up to Afton. Interestingly, we have accounted for all 6 victims of the original 1985 killings, and so it does seem possible then that the Vengeful Spirit may in actual fact be one of the 1987 killings that we see in FNAF 2. And so that is my headcanon that I'm working around for this story. The Lucky Boy doll is possessed by Andrew by the point that Sergio finds it, and Andrew does appear to act the same kind of way that the Lucky Boy doll does. He is kind of moderately supportive, but not always in a positive way, and Sergio himself is also at this time just losing his marbles, and so that is not helping to contribute to it in any way. We know that Sergio has a manager named Dale, but what we know is that there is another Dale who exists in FNAF VR, who is the Tape Girls company's manager. However, I don't believe that these may actually be connected at all, because given the dating differences between these two stories, Dave would have to be pretty old by the time that fnaf VR came around in order for it to be the same person. We also learned that an employee named Sanders recently left the company, and Clive is an employee who is Sergio's work buddy, and Fiona is also one of his colleagues. Sergio has a girlfriend who he has been dating for the past year, which we find is a girl named Violet, and we will also find that the office that he works in has a steakhouse across the road, a gas station which is 2 blocks away, and a rundown retail district. The Horizon is noted to be the best restaurant in town at this point in time. A hotel that is described as being ancient is noted to exist in town, and it is the location that is used for the class reunion. We know of a girl named Sophia Manchester, who is a girl Sergio went to school with, and he also has a nosy neighbour named Mrs. Bailey, who is a small grey-haired woman who wears pastel shirt dresses. There's a police officer named Neil, who is noted to appear during the story, and we also learn of Sergio's dad Tony, who owns a transport company and had Sergio when he was 30. He had ridiculously high standards on his son. Claire Fredericks is a real estate agent who Sergio begins to date after Violet, who breaks up with him after the car crash, and her surname does appear to be one that we see again in the stories at a point in the future. And so that is the first 3 stories that I have in the Fazbear's Frights novels, and as the novels were noted to basically cover different corners of the lore, then it is plausible to presume then that these stories do in fact span events across the timeline. And as we do come to see, based on what I have gathered so far from the stories that I have read, that while a massive majority of these are connected to what is called the Stitchwraith saga, based on the stingers at the end of each book, there are also quite a few stories that first appear disconnected, but in fact seem to occur before the events of fnaf 3. Going forward, I am going to cover the 2 stories that connect most heavily to Help Wanted, which would be In the Flesh and Prankster, and then I am going to dive headlong into the Stitchwraith saga, and then all the stories that are closely associated to it. And then, once I have a full working timeline built up for the events in the Stitchwraith part of the timeline, I'm then going to look at all the more obscure and random stories within the Fazbear's Frights novels to figure out where exactly they fall within the lore and the timeline.